Okay, welcome. Plan Team Weekly. What's the date? August 5th. Julian, you have the first point.
All right, let me just share my screen. Yeah, so we've recently decided that the health status of an issue becomes less relevant once we close it. So we shouldn't really display it in the epic tree just to clear up the user space, and then also disallow editing the health status. So, by the way, thanks Felipe for doing the backend work on this. So as you can see, there is this closed issue right here, right? Now we do not allow editing it since it's closed, but we reopen this one. And then as we can see, we can re-edit it. And then we go back. As you can see, there's needs attention. It's there again. Yep, so again, the masterminds behind this was Keenan and Alex's thank you. Yep, so that's the demo.
Cool. Questions? Comments? Alexis says looks good.
Yeah, it looks good. I'm just wondering, I guess in the future, and I think Keenan and I discussed this a bit, are we thinking about rolling in kind of that like locking or dropping status after close to issues as well, Gabe? What do you think?
Sorry, I was looking at a comment down the thing.
Don't worry. No, so like after an issue is closed, would you imagine at some point some of that data being locked or kind of dropping off the issue?
Yeah, I would think some stuff would be locked, but I guess it depends on if you lock the issue or not. I mean, there's an ability to lock it once it's closed, which would prevent certain like non-members from editing it. But I don't. Yeah, there's been another request too to have the due date color change when an issue has been closed, because it still shows red even though it's closed, like it's overdue, but it's not really overdue. So I think it's fine to look at some of that stuff. I would probably keep it on the issue forever, but like showing it on the other places like cards and things like that could be conditional once it's closed. I could see us doing that for certain things.
Yeah, something to think about. Thank you, that looks really good.
Cool. Kong, are you? Yeah, you are on. Second demo?
Kong, you're muted.
He's just going to demo silently.
All right, so I'm going to demo what we have so far for iterations within projects. So here I am in the GitLab test project, and I can go over to issues and select iterations here, which then takes me to an iterations page within the project. And here it's listing right now just all the projects, but from what I understand, eventually what we want is to list iterations here that only have issues that are part of this project. So that's all I have for the demo so far. Any questions?
I think it looks great. I asked the wider community what they thought about the inheritance of iterations. And I'm still on the fence of like, should we only show it if there are issues, or should we always show it if there's an inherited iteration, and prevent like subgroups from creating overlapping iterations from inherited iterations, if that makes sense. Like there's that weird thing where the whole point of it is to have a single cadence, time box cadence for like measuring velocity. So I'm gonna see how they responded and what sort of feedback they had, but what do y'all think about how it should behave? Just curious.
So just to clarify, you're saying like if, for example, on this, looking at the screen, if like iteration for August 1st to August 2nd, a subgroup wants to make an iteration for that time frame, this one already exists, but they don't see it. They would like hypothetically wouldn't see it because it didn't have issues in it. They wouldn't be able to create a new one. They would want to see this one and use this one. Is that correct?
Yeah. So like, should you make it so that all children groups that inherit an iteration basically have to work within the inherited iterations, or give them the option to go their own direction? I'm leaning towards the latter just because it gives individual teams more autonomy.
Yes.
But it also is like a usability concern of being like, well, where's the iteration in this list? I don't see it, even though I know it's in the parent group, because there's not an issue in it yet.
Right.
So from two thoughts, Gabe. One, I think you're right. You should give the flexibility. And in a future MVC, you could create a policy where a group could say that my subgroups must follow, right? Of enforcing iterations, basically.
Yeah.
Enforcing a cascade. That's a policy decision, I think, that you want to support. But I think your default out of the box should give individual subgroups the flexibility to do their own cadence. I mean, you were in the conversations in marketing as to how we kind of got all wrapped around the axle around this at some level.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, that's good feedback. So
the only other thing on this view, it'd be really useful to know whether or not an iteration is from here, is from GitLab test or GitLab org. There'd be a treatment of some way to indicate that these things came from somewhere.
yeah, we have an issue scheduled to make the list better.
Yeah, we're using naming convention to keep track of things like this in marketing.
Okay.
And that's a hack.
Yeah, I agree. We have a issue, I think, scheduled for 13.4, and Holly's not here, but she's going to work on some design for it to
cool
make the issue list view more actionable, like so including the slug of where the thing originated from, and also progress indicators and other things like that. So good feedback.
Cool.
Thanks.
All right, next point is mine, swim lanes, iteration 1 for the swim lanes, since we put that schedule in there, but in reality, it'll be for GitLab org iteration 2 review. So last week's objective was to finish the GraphQL queries to allow for a read-only swim lane board. I put a quick status of where we're at. 2 of the 3 are merged. They're close to being merged. The backend MRs, that is. Merged are close to being merged. We did discover some performance implications on the 3rd. That's going to take a bit more investigation and work. John, you want to talk through your comment?
Yeah, sure. Well, Jan's on the call, so maybe he can give more context, but basically the query itself will not change. The database query that it performs in the background is at the minute quite slow. I think also there might be implications for whether we show or hide the open and closed columns. Like those will reduce the complexity of the query, but I'm not totally sure. Maybe Jan, maybe you'd know better.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, there is a performance issue. The problem is that now if you create a board, for example, in GitLab work group, in open list, you can technically see all open issues from all projects in GitLab org. So we need to find all epics which might be connected with these issues. So we have to join with tens of thousands of issues. And this is relatively slow with cold cache. With on cache, now it's quite fast. We get to 300 milliseconds, but with cold cache, it's 30 seconds or more. So if you would have an idea, for example, for first iteration, how to limit the scope of issues for which we have to find an epic, so we don't have to filter or fetch all tens of thousands of issues. It would be very helpful, at least for first iteration. Otherwise, we are working with database team to figure out how to optimize this.
Yeah, so I just want to walk through what I think it should be doing now, and you can tell me if that's what we're doing. But we should only be looking for epics that are open, and then it should be issues that share, the property of lists, right? So I think those are the two filters we started with, right? Or the two parameters that we're able to filter down the issues on.
Sorry, you mentioned issues that share a property on a list?
Like the list that the board's made out of here.
Yeah, but the one of the list is backlog, yeah, open issues.
Right, and then the other list is open. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, that's the main problem, I guess.
So you said it's 30 seconds cold cache right now, or is that warm cache?
Yeah, cold cache is 30, warm cache is fine. It's 300 milliseconds.
So what do we have to get it on there? Like what's our baseline for cold cache?
Yeah, it's not clear to me. I think that they are trying to make sure that it's less than 15 seconds timeout, because otherwise the user gets 500 error because the SQL statement times out.
Did we not decide not to do pagination?
Yeah, the problem is that that's a great point. The problem is that on issue board, when you fetch list, you do pagination, which is fine. But if I want to paginate epics, I need first to get a list of all possible epics. And to get all possible epics, I need to get all issues. So I cannot paginate only 100 issues. Yeah.
Yes, I see the conundrum.
Yeah, so I think that I hope we will get some conclusion with database team to, for example, go forward with feature flag or figure out something and see how it behaves in production. But meantime, if you had some idea how to limit the scope of issues we have to work on or for which we have to find epics, let me know, please, or ping me in the issue so we would be able to get from tens of thousands of issues to just, for example, hundreds or thousands of issues.
What if we, like, when querying issues, we basically query until we find, I don't know, 10 epics, and then of those 10 epics, we then query all the issues for each of those epics, and that way you can load those immediately onto the board, and then do asynchronous like finding of the rest of the epics, and then you could do pagination that way. So you wouldn't have them all at first. You basically like query until you find 10, then find all the issues for those 10, and then in the background do the rest of the processing.
I see. You mean some incremental search of epics. So we would first fetch thousands of issues, try to find epics for them, and if we would have enough for the page of epics, we would use this. Yeah, that might work. I'm afraid the concern is that it wouldn't work for another pages. Yeah, so if you would want to get fifth page, you would still have to find enough issues for it.
What if we maintained a project epics table, which we updated with every time an issue in a project is added to group level epic, we add it to that table, and then we query that table. So it's like a cache that we keep updated. Then we don't have to do a join through issues. We would just, it's more like it's going to extend. It's going to extend this work. It's not something we can do overnight, but we did this for project authorizations, I think, or group authorizations.
Yeah, some kind of caching the attribute to speed this up might be an option too, if we can figure out other way around. So yeah, that's a good point.
This is also one of those things that is like a self-inflicted performance issue to a certain degree because of how flexible we've made everything. And I'm wondering if we need to, like, at some point put more constraints on the product itself and how it behaves. Because I think part of the problem is like you first have to look at what the board is scoped to, and then only look at issues that have that scope, and then find the epics, and then like, whereas like in a traditional project, a project would have epics and issues, and you could only associate the two, and it wouldn't be like so massive. I'm just wondering if there's things that we need to change from the product itself to help improve performance.
We run into problems with that specific scenario because users need to be able to map work from different projects to higher level items to do kind of higher level, like cross team, cross department planning. Well, I'm not disagreeing with your overall point though.
Would it help, or would it be possible if we kept swim lanes on groups? We would still have to get all the issues, right?
Mhm.
All right, yeah, that wouldn't help it then.
It's worth mentioning, I was just poking around with Jira to see what they do, and it looks like they have some filter that's not apparent to the user, but they only show recently modified issues in swim lanes. So like in the catch-all swim lane, like issues without epics, when you have an epic swim lane on a Jira board, it's only showing recently modified. It doesn't tell you what that is, but they probably have a similar performance issue, and they're deciding to like lop off some set of issues, or they maintain some flag that's like recently updated or not. I'm not sure, but something to consider.
Yeah, that might help a lot. For example, if we would limit the scope to, for example, only recent issues or something. So yeah, that would effectively help with the SQL performance here.
Would that be like a date range, Jan? Like last modified in the last 30 days or something like that?
Yeah, I think so.
Keenan, what do you think? Would that be? How often do you need to consider an issue inside of a swim lane that hasn't been touched in?
Yeah, no, I think it's a viable option. I think I'm watching Alexis's gears turn on how do we display that and communicate it.
I'm taking notes, yeah.
Well, if you could paginate that way, that might be sort of helpful too. Like you could go by date range and only load in the first 30 and then 30 days. And then if you like want to look at something older, you can load in the next 30 days. Something like that.
Because at the same time, we're also dealing with the board scope itself, right? Which should be limiting the number of items returned and not issues without epics, right?
Yeah, basically the board scope is the major issue here because the board scope can be really huge. So whatever helps limiting the scope,
yeah,
it will help with the performance.
I wonder, could we simply bail out in the first iteration if the filters on the board are too permissive? Same way we do with, I think it's issue search. You can't search across, you can't search from the dashboard view, for example, across all issues just by like one label or something, because that would search every project, every group. So you have to put in a certain amount of criteria, certain number of criteria. So maybe we could do that as a first iteration. You simply can't load a board that asks for everything, everything on GitLab org/GitLab that's labeled backend, you know.
I mean, what do we do with a normal board when you just scope by backend, right? Like, what's the?
Right now, we're just loading. We like paginate. So, yeah, so each list loads 20 cards or finds 20 issues at a time.
Mhm.
And so like it kind of is looking at taking into consideration the global board configuration plus your lists, whatever attribute that is, and doing search for the first 20. And I think it's however many different lists you have, it does a separate network request for each list.
Maybe would it be viable to just return a warning? For example, if your issue board shows more than, we can easily check the size of issues in the issue board. So if it would be, for example, more than 500 epics, we should just return an error or warning, as John suggested. Your issue board is too big. Please limit the scope.
Yeah.
Seems like a good MVC, right? Like if that's saves you a bunch of effort and having to refactor queries.
Would it help at all? I don't know if it would if we put in some like scope, because this is also the same thing for program boards or Epic boards. I think at some point we're gonna have swim lanes there. If we have some sort of board scope for epics as well in the same board, so you're only looking for a subset of epics that match a subset of issues, or would that make it more complicated?
Sorry, I misunderstood the suggestion here.
So, for example, like the project management group, for the project management group's epics, we put the same label on the epics. And so I'm wondering if like right now you can say, I want to find like scope this board to all issues that have the group project management label, right? And that's for issues. Would it help if you also had a scope for epics that you would search? So like only show epics that have the group project management label on it or something like that as well, so that you're not looking through as many epics, or would that hurt performance? I guess that was the question.
You're saying like that filter bar at the top should affect the epics being returned for the swim lanes?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I will have to do some measurements to tell you, but perhaps yes. Yeah,
so, I filter by back-end work, and my epics have front-end work in them as well, right? Like I would then be obfuscating a lot of the work we even have from the board view.
Yeah, so if we limit scope on epic size, I'm not sure if it helps because we still have to join the issues with epics through the epic issues table, and I'm not sure if there will be significant difference in performance for this.
Yeah, makes sense.
So for this first iteration, then can we just put a limit on the number of issues, like whatever the limit would be to get it under what, 15 seconds you said, Jan? Can we just do that for the first iteration, and then we'll come back? Because the options then, I think, or the best options are either do that or just put it behind a feature flag to get that MR through. I think the error is fine for the first iteration, and then we can handle that on the front end with minimal work. And then we can figure out, because regardless of our solution, I think there's going to be some UX work that we have to put into it. So I don't want to, if possible, push back getting the backend MR if we don't have to.
I mean, like what's the limit we're kind of thinking we might have to impose, just ballpark?
My guess is, for example, 1,000 of issues should be hopefully fine.
1,000. Okay. Well, because the reason I ask is looking at like our work board, we've got 1,300 issues in the open column. So like, would we automatically not be able to use our work board because the open and closed columns are so big?
I see. So in that
That's
case, it was just a guess. So I would have, I will update the query and do the measurement on database lab, and I will ping you back with some timings.
But I mean, even in that case, Keenan, are you thinking someone would use the swim lane board without its scope to at least like a group label?
that is scoped to, I mean, that's our portfolio certified board, right? It's scoped to DevOps plan, show me all issues in DevOps plan that aren't project management, right? So, which I would assume means project management probably has larger numbers in their columns. That's why I'm asking, right?
How many do you say there were with that scope like that? 13,000?
No, 100. 1,300 in the open column, and
That's still a
then
lot.
700 in the closed. So this is the inherent problem with the open closed column, and one of the reasons we were discussing how do we move them off the board when selected by users to help verify this is because the way our open, often called backlog column, it's everything. Like it's not scoped. The open column is not scoped down, and the closed column is even worse if you've been working in GitLab for long enough to create enough issues, because it's just a constantly increasing chunk of closed work, right? And so
what if you search just the issues that were in a list first, and then find the epics for those, and then did the open and closed whatever later? Because it's similar to the time-based thing. Because I wouldn't want to see things that are open that are part of an epic that doesn't have a workflow label on it first. I would want to see the things that did have a workflow label on it first. So that could be a way to like split up the query too.
Yeah, let me ask this question just because I don't fully understand it, and like how we're like if we're looking at the board, like the board configuration is like the first parameter of filtering. Then you have the filter bar that you're doing your active filtering on, and then you have your lists. Those three kind of varying layers of filtering to get you down to the funnel of the issues that you would then need to associate with epics, right? Like, guys, what order do we fetch issues in that board construct?
Yes. Was there already a question?
Like what order of those do we like? What's the order of information we use to filter issues for a board, right? Because you've got like the board configuration, then you've got the filter bar, and then you have the actual lists or workflow states like we have. So you have 3 layers of filtering we use till you get the snapshot of where the board is and the issues that should be on there that we would then put the epic swim lane on. I guess it's what's the order that we do that? Because it seems I just don't understand.
You mean order for epic swim lanes?
No, just in general. Like what's the general?
Yeah. So on issue board, basically you fetch issues per each of the list, yeah, or for each of the column, and you pass all the parameters. The problem is that for backlog or for the first open column, we still have to filter or get all the issues which don't fit to any of the list, but can still occur in the open list column. Yeah. So for swim lanes, it's easiest for me to ignore any list filtering, just select all open issues which may occur in any of the list, including the backlog. It's the easiest filter, and fetch these issues and then get epics for them.
Yeah, so I think it's scoped. The only thing we care about scope wise is the board scope. So within that config modal and the filter bar. So those two are what is essentially what the limits of issues that we search for are.
Yeah.
We should, Keenan, and probably Keenan and Alexis, we should dig into the like time-based filter in the query and see how viable that might be. Because I just feel like 1,300 issues, you really only care in that open column about like the next, 20, right? When you're looking at a board, I'd argue maybe more, but not 13, not the 1,290th, right? So
yeah, I mean, Gabe, what are your thoughts on how the open and closed columns exist right now. I'm like, I'm just assuming you've run into this before we did, or at least think about it now.
Yeah. I don't see anybody that I've seen use boards doesn't have as many issues as we do. So
Yep.
like they use the open as the backlog. And I think that's why I created a label for myself that is like or the workflow start label as a backlog, so that I can move things into my actual backlog. And this could be an opportunity for us to create a real backlog. I think it's a problem. And the one problem with the time-based approach is that unless there's a way for me to load more, then discoverability of things becomes limited. And I think right now discoverability of things is limited from the open column because you only can see a few things and you have to scroll really far. So I know that there have been requests for better backlog management in GitLab. Like the issue list doesn't work because of pagination and you can't manually drag things from one page to another. We can fix that with infinite scroll, sort of like we do on boards, but then you're dragging things, 100 positions, which is not fun either.
Yeah, well, and I think we're closer to an opportunity to actually solve that in a valuable way because of iterations, right? That's generally when folks start running into the backlog construct and wanting to use that as a foundation for planning work, because you actually then say, I have a backlog and I have upcoming iterations and I want to start dragging things in between those and started them, right? So we're maybe on the cusp of needing to do that now.
Yeah, that's how I always worked in Pivot Tracker, and not the cleanest way, but I wish it worked this way, where I had my epics, and then I could see all my issues that were in my epic that weren't scheduled to an iteration, and then I could drag it into the specific iteration, right? So I can see I basically can see all the epics I'm working on, and then easily schedule them different issues into different iterations, and then anything that's not scheduled is not there. And that's what we can do, I think, with boards with swim lanes, because we can have iterations as lists, and you could have your epics with all the issues, and you could drag it, schedule them that way. So I think there's lots of ways to do it, and I would like to explore that. It's worth it, or whatever we can do for better backlog management. I think it's a problem we need to solve. So
yeah. Sorry, real quick, what would happen if we remove the open and close, or the open column? That would people would create a backlog label, right?
Probably. That's what I would do.
Is that?
Are you suggesting, Donald, that by doing that we automatically encourage better board scoping?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, that's where a lot of this conversation started a few weeks ago. I was like, hey, when you turn swim lane on, the open and close column should be hidden. But then you can't you can't hide the closed column because I need to drag things there to close them, right? So you need that one. But the question is, what is the open column actually doing that can't be done better by a scoped backlog column? I don't know.
Well, I'll also say about the closed is there is an inherent problem in that lots of teams, their workflow, their done state is not closed. It's like they might finish some work and hand it off to a QA team, and then they don't touch it again, right? And so they can't use a lot of the burn down stuff and milestone stuff and progress reporting because their done is not closed, so the reporting is inaccurate. The way that Trello handles this, which I think is pretty brilliant, is they have an archive feature. So in your last list, you basically can say, I'm going to archive all these cards, which would be closing it, and then it takes them off the board and puts them in this archive area that's separate from the board. So we could look at having a final list, and either how it works in Jira is you could say this is this list state means that it's done, which is separate from being closed. And we could look at doing that, and then periodically you can archive things from your done list, and that would, or close things from your done list, which would then close the issue and remove it entirely. That way we wouldn't show open or closed.
Yeah, we could also just not show closed, and just on the far right have a little drag and drop area that says close issue, and then when someone drags something in there, it just is gone.
I've been quietly listening. I apologize, my video is screwed up. I gotta fix it. But I love the idea of getting rid of both open and closed columns from boards. I think they're distracting. There's way too much there. And the idea of then what Donald just suggested of having a place to drag it for closed if you want to close it. I think it would make these things much, much cleaner and force people to establish the clear parts of it. Because I always collapse them. They're noisy because there's so many darn issues. We have 2,000 issues in strategic marketing. I don't need to see them all. Never do. So we're using labels to scope stuff.
So it seems like we have the right next step in terms of just throw an error and Jan's going to figure out how many issues about that is, right? So that unblocks us for now. And then maybe this is our chance.
I have one clarifying question on that. So is the actual concern the big bucket at the bottom, which is like issues without an epic? Is that because is that the one where we're worried there's going to be so many, or is it really just in general?
It's in general because you have to look through every single issue before you can find all the potential epics. Then and that's the problem, is that you're querying in my board's case 33,000 issues before you can even get the epics to build the swim lanes. So I think that's where if we didn't have the open and closed, then it would only be 150 issues, which is not a big deal at all.
Could we just not have swim lanes apply to open and close? I think that was one of the early explorations we did as well. So I see my open and close, but
they
still query.
have to do all that work regardless of the open and close column, right? Yeah.
So if it's there in the swim, if they're not pulling in epics by open and close, it would still cause performance issues.
I would have to recheck. I cannot say offhand because perhaps it would be much better regarding this performance issue. I just have to check that all the filters used for all the list will be fast enough.
And then we need to go back to that what does that look like question then, Alexis, because the problem was swim lanes or the epics being displayed on the swim lane artifact being displayed to the left side of the board would then need to cross over a column that it doesn't actually affect. And what do we know?
It would just be, the swim lanes are contained within 2 columns, basically. I've seen it in other products. It's not, we wouldn't be reinventing the wheel, so it could be viable, but
yeah.
I think we were under the assumption that open and close were more important than they were, maybe. I don't know. We'll play around with it, Keenan.
Okay. I'm open to it.
Okay, so just circling back, first step is to add a limit to whatever Jan decides is the appropriate amount, and then we'll figure out the UX implications of open, close, and everything else.
Yep. Thanks, everyone. That's a meaty conversation. That was a good one.
Jan, can I see a thumbs up from you?
Yeah, awesome. Thanks.
Cool.
I think it's a great next step.
Okay, so then let's talk about the next iteration, because we had planned to get the read-only version out. Realistically, Jan, if we add the limit, when do you think, how long do you think it would take to get that to get everything merged into master?
So it's in a review process, so it depends on how fast database review will be done and approved, and so I had to so our official limits are 2 days for feedback, so perhaps till the end of this week, hopefully.
Yeah, and with database review, we can't really, because we don't have any database reviewers within the team, right? So it's not like we can try to push it within the team to expedite the process.
I'm afraid that the problem is that there are many vacations, and database expert mentioned that they are overloaded a little bit now. So they have many reviews in queue.
Okay, so I'm proposing then we keep iteration 2 as is, but of course dependent on when that gets in, because what's left for iteration 2, which is, like I said, the read-only version of swim lanes, is we just need to integrate. So we need to have the backend GraphQL queries merged in. That's going to take at least a few days after it gets merged. So again, what I'm proposing is we keep it as is, where we aim to get that done by iteration 2, but let's acknowledge that it probably will move into the next iteration. And then when we come back next week, we can see where we're at and move the other iterations back, at least an iteration if need be.
Yeah, makes sense to me.
Everyone else feel okay with that?
Can we work off that branch in the meantime? Because like I said, the GraphQL query itself, the schema shouldn't change, just what happens in the background.
Yeah, so I asked Flory to confirm, but I think we have been working off of that branch. So it's essentially just like the final integrations that needs to happen, that we wanted to work off of all of them, all of the branches, all the backend branches being merged in there. Okay, cool. So we'll go forward with that plan. All right, Alexis, Epic boards.
I was just looking at swim lanes and trying to whip something up, but it's hard. Cool. I'll talk about boards in general. We've got a lot of requests from users to see epics on their boards. Keenan and I translated that into, they want like epic or program boards, which is basically allowing them to plan at a higher level and see how epics work through the workflow of a board, as opposed to seeing how their issues go through the workflow of a board, and helps them track and report on initiatives at a higher level. So it's just a different view of boards, basically. And Keenan, if you want to add anything there, feel free.
Yeah, so it's kind of it's also our largest, and it's our largest, or one of the largest gaps we have for being able to onboard organizations that practice SAFe. We can have our opinions on that, but the idea that I can actually manage epics through workflow at a higher level, either before they have issues assigned to them, if it's like an idea backlog or a long-term work backlog, where I say, hey, these are the 6 features I, as a product manager, are going to manage over the next 90 days. I need to get it from ideation to validation to design solution to the point where it's ready for engineering to take a look and help break it out. Or the idea of like, I have work in flight, epics are being worked on, and I need to track those over time at a higher level to report it to my stakeholders and my, or outside customers to look at it instead of showing a board with 1,000 issues on it. Maybe I just want it has 100 epics on it. So
yeah.
I didn't know it was that funny.
Sorry, everything's funny. I'm surprised I'm awake right now because I haven't had enough coffee. Yeah, so this is pretty rough. I'll just walk you all through this. But for MVC, we are going to add a boards option within the epics navigation. So users can navigate to the boards within epics, and of course they see epics because they have that permission. They can create a new board, and it all looks pretty familiar for MVC. They could hide the open and close list. They could scope by label for MVC, create their board. And again, it looks pretty similar, except they're seeing epic cards on the board instead of issues. And again, this is just a rough prototype, so don't take it with a grain of salt. They can add their list, and for MVC, they can add epic lists by label. So they see that. They can still create new epics within a list. They can add existing epics. I'd assume this means like they're not scoped to this board. And and they could still investigate a single epic and quickly edit it, and they can still, oops, wrong thing, set a WIP limit by epic. And in the future, we'll, past MVC, we'll investigate a little bit more. We're going to loop in growth as well to think about first use states. I think that will also help with some of the scoping issues we're having, having the funnel be a little bit different. Users come in and they create a new board and they're encouraged in a better way to scope, and they understand what the implications of having, huge boards that are unscoped means. Thinking about better ways to basically display planning in the navigation in general. And can we do things like just combine boards together? So I go to just a boards area and I see all my different kinds of boards, or thinking about better ways to add columns. I think Simon was talking about this as well. So, what are different ways we could allow users to add columns? Can they just like scroll to the end of their list and say, I want to add another list? Different ways to visualize the header to support users a little bit better here. And again, this is all really rough, so don't look at it too much. Do we have any questions there? I'm going to turn off my mic so you can't hear me laughing this time, Keenan. Cool. And we're going to keep working on this, so let me know, or just add feedback or questions to that issue I linked. When I was looking at Epic swim lanes, let me see if I can find it. What I meant about the not showing swim lanes on open and close, I don't know if this makes sense, and I couldn't mock it up very fast because, again, I need more coffee. But basically, see, I have this open column here, and I think y'all probably all understood what I mean, but the epics start at the first workflow column, and then closed also, see, it wouldn't have, this says open, but it would be closed. It wouldn't have the swim lanes applied to it. So I don't know if that would help at all, but that's just another idea. Throwing it back to swim lanes at, yeah. Cool, that's all I have.
Thank you, Alexis.
Cool. It is the first of the month. Anyone have any metrics highlights update?
First off, I threw that in there and I forgot to put it as a discussion point of would the group find that valuable? Because then that's something we on the product side could plan and organize and share. And then ironically, I forgot to do it. So I can always talk about my metrics as I have them. I always refresh them first thing in the morning, but just from an overall group perspective, like, is that something to be interested? What kind of metrics would you like to see? We're trying to find better ways to craft that message for the individual groups so it's valuable. But I would actually really like to have thoughts and opinions from the group on what we could do here to help.
I can go. Just from an engineering point of view, I think it'd be really nice to just see basic metrics and like explain to me like M5 kind of metrics about usership of features that we've released, maybe with say a 3-month lag or something. So let's say we moved to Epics to Premium 3 months ago. Like, what did that do for usership of Epics? Maybe if we have sales numbers as well, that would be really interesting. Just stuff that we don't see every day when we're like in the middle of things, like working on features. Be really nice just to see like how those contributions that we made panned out in the long run, and what was effective and what customers care about and that kind of thing.
Yeah, we can definitely, I mean, I can actually show some of that if we're interested right now. Sales numbers probably not, because I know these are public recordings. So the specifics probably can't, but that's okay.
Yeah, why don't you spend a couple minutes, Keenan, walk through your dashboard? I can spend just lightning a couple minutes walking through mine too.
Yeah, I'm trying to resize my window so it doesn't look like everybody's staring at a mural, because I have my ultra wide screen. All right, I'll go through it real quick. Let me know when you can see my screen.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, so actually I'll start with kind of what we're doing from the product business side and explain it, because you're going to hear, if you haven't already heard these terms a ton, you're going to hear them a lot more. But we have the idea of what each group should be tracking, something that's called GMAU, or group monthly active users, which are active individual users using part of the product, and those then get aggregated up into stage level monthly active users, and then total monthly active users for the entirety of GitLab. So we have our first initial pass at that for portfolio management, which is really just users creating epics. We're going to expand that into users interacting, and so these numbers will grow quite a bit once we have that data in. We're just waiting for the data team to help us out on some of it. But one of the interesting things here you can see is this stretches back to December of 18. So the top one is SaaS and self-managed, orange being self-managed, SaaS being purple. And of course, when we talk about self-managed metrics, we have to keep in mind that 30% of our self-managed instances are providing this data. So that number is a subset of the reality, but it is what we have to work off of. And you can actually see, going from, back to, let's say, August of last year, we were only really reporting about 56 unique users on SaaS. And when we launched we started improving epics. We back around August to September, we did see an organic level of growth start to kick off. Like we doubled, we actually 4x'd in about 6 months the number of users on SaaS. And then as soon as we introduced premium epics, which was in the very last couple of weeks of February, we actually saw pretty huge growth on both sides, as we had a lot of new accounts and adopters overall. So you can see we're now, right getting close to 2,000 active users creating epics every month on the platform, which is a substantial increase from where we were 6 months ago, and which is something we should be extremely proud of. And now at the bottom, this is just this graph at the bottom is really just an aggregation of the number of epics being created in the two different types of accounts. Again, let's go back to August, August was an off month. So let's say, here in September, we're at 1,500 a month, and now we're almost 6,000 a month being created. So this all just comes from us consistently being part of the release post process and rolling out new features and improving things and adding those table stake items that users needed and expected for epics to be viable. And as you can see, like just being part of the release process and rolling out these new features and marketing them has driven a ton of usage and adoption over the platform. And what we're also now I'm working with the data team is now I'm trying to get to the point where we can actually track number of issues assigned to epics over time. Well, actually, I think we're going to have to do some work on that too. I think Donald and John, I did it again. I'm so sorry. Donald and John and I have been talking about this, because then we can actually show how the adoption of epics over time is actually driving more plan usage overall, because the theory and belief is that as you adopt epics, you actually start breaking work down more, which means you're actually using more issues, more MRs, et cetera, et cetera. So we're going to get more granular on how does a feature increase actually drive increase across the entire stage. Which is super exciting. Let's see if there's another. So specific, the other one I want to talk about is up here in the top left. This is the number of active, excuse me, over here on the right. We already did that. This is the number of namespaces we see on .com using epics. And so again, we go back to, September, November, we're like 40, 50. And as of July, we were, 358. So that is, a lot of that starting, you see this big jump from January to February, which is when we rolled epics to premium. So huge adoption on the .com side relative to where we were before, and it's continuing to have nice, strong organic growth monthly, month over month, close to 10%, with the exception of June, which is a little lower. And then down into self-managed, it's the same data we had across, but this one here, this top one, we actually see a split of number of epics created month over month across premium and ultimate. So one of the concerns was that if we move epics down to premium, ultimate adoption might suffer. And as we see, ultimate use creation of epics is still on the rise and has actually had quite a large uptick since March. So we didn't hurt ultimate adoption or usage overall. And in fact, with adding premium, we've doubled the number of epics we see being created by accounts every month. top left again, this is the same view we had on namespaces, but this is self-managed accounts. And so you go back to September last year, we had 433 self-managed instances who are reporting data using Epics, and we are getting really close to breaking 1,000. So doubling the adopted self-managed accounts. And so that's all super exciting. That's really strong growth over time that is consistent, which is what you want. And it's also interesting to know, you know, we're in a unique position on the portfolio management side that every user we have is a paid user, either in premium or ultimate. And so our Gmail is essentially a paid group monthly active user, which is pretty exciting over time. The other item I always like to talk about is, like John, you said you'd like to see feature data as we roll it out over time. So this is some high-level health status adoption. So you can see this is .com, just the number of health status assignments. You know, we had a pretty high adoption in May, which a lot of this is actually still scoped internal usage, and pretty still consistent usage over time the last couple months. This top graph here shows green bar is total number of health status changes. The orange is unique number of users on .com doing that. And then purple is unique issues that have health status. So we are having consistent usage from about 150 to 180 users month over month. Self-managed as well, we've seen 725 total issues with a health status and 107 instances using them. So that actually, if we're almost to 1,000 instances on using Epics and 100 of them are using health status, we're actually about 10% of that self-managed group that we have data on has adopted this feature and is using it month over month, which is pretty great in a 90-day period. This is why I'm excited to start surfacing health status in other parts of the products, especially like on boards, because right now this is really just valuable at the Epic tree level. And if we can actually allow people to use workflows with that data point, I think we're going to see some substantial increase in that usage. And then we already, because we knocked out the confidential epics and we put tracking data into it immediately, we have data on that right away, which is great. You can ignore this August data. That's not complete, obviously, because the month's not over. But in, what was it? In July, we had 263 confidential epics created. A lot of that is internal, but is some external. And then on self-managed, we saw 9 in the few days it was live before we did a self-managed data upload. So I'm excited to see what that looks like in August. So those are my highlights. Anyway, if there's anything else you want to see, let me know. But again, great job overall. Like, we're driving real usage in a part of the product that drives real revenue. And so we should be extremely happy and proud about that.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, that was really interesting. There was one stat just at the beginning I was curious about. It seemed like very recently we had growth in self-managed for a feature. I forgot which feature it was. Maybe it was epics, creation of epics. It seemed like those, so the orange bar only showed up about February, I think. Did we just start tracking that? It was right up the top of the metrics page, by the way.
You're muted, Keenan. It looks really good, though, what you said.
Okay. Yeah, so I think that's when the data we were able to like aggregate it correctly in the same way that we're doing SaaS, so it was unified. Yeah. So I think that's more of we have the data, we can actually track it, but it is still organically growing. Yeah. That's a great call.
Thanks.
Cool. Gabe, you had some stuff?
I think we're at time, and I want to be respectful. So I dropped a link into the dashboard, the project management one, and I'll walk through it next week or whenever we have our next time together, if that's helpful. But I think the most interesting, if you look at that, is towards the bottom. There's just weekly feature adoption by release, and I'll just share my screen. This one thing because I think it is very interesting. So
that's a fun one, but it is hard to read the first time. So
yeah. So what we're looking at here is like how many people are adopting plan, specifically issues, per new release. And so like over a course of 4 weeks, you see things start declining because people are upgrading to the next release. So that's like, it's a normal curve after the like kind of 4 week point, since we release on a monthly basis. But what's interesting about this is like you can kind of look at 12.10, only 27% of people adopt a plan in the first week, which means that they upgraded quickly and then started using issues. And so for each release, this has steadily been going up. And then for 13.2, it's up to 37%, which is the highest first week adoption that we've ever had. And so I think it's like just an interesting, I'm still working with the data team to figure out how to plot this and understand the story of, as we build new things, is it driving an increase in adoption rates for our product and for the features that we're building? And then how's that trending over time? And so like, it's cool to see like, because we're iterating on things and adding new things and making things better, it's driving an increase in adoption, which is what we want to see, because adoption is like the leading indicator of more or less being able to generate revenue. So anyway, cool data point. Just thought I'd share it, but you can check out the rest of the chart or dashboard if you want, if you're interested. I can walk through it more next week.
Cool. Thanks all. All right. We'll call it. Thanks for
everyone.
staying a little bit later.
Have a great week.
Bye.